Welcome to Lesson 6 in Unit 13, Adapting to Change. In this lesson, students will answer the question, how are living things interconnected? Students will figure out that organisms are not just connected to their predators or prey, they are also connected to many other organisms in the ecosystem. A disruption of one organism could affect many other organisms in that ecosystem. In the Engage portion of the lesson, students return to the system they made to move the marble in Lesson 3. Ask students to recall how the parts of that system were connected and what happened when one part was removed. How are the parts of an ecosystem connected, and what would happen if a living thing was removed? After students turn and talk, ask for a few to share out their thoughts to the class. Although it may be tempting, do not reveal the correct answers yet. If students ask, explain that these questions will be answered later on in the lesson. In the Explore portion of the lesson, students will do the following activity to model interconnectedness in ecosystems and what happens when an organism is removed from an ecosystem. First, give each student a card from a set of prairie cards. There are only 16 cards, so it may be necessary to have students pair up. Have all students stand up with their card and explain that the purple coneflower is a producer in the prairie ecosystem. We are going to see what would happen if the purple coneflowers in the prairie all disappeared. Then direct the student with the purple coneflower to come to the front of the class and sit down. Ask the student holding the purple coneflower to then read what eats the purple coneflower. All students holding those cards should now sit down. Next, tell each student who sat down to read what animals eat it. Any new organism called must now also sit down. Call attention to the remaining organisms, or those that are left standing, and engage students using the following discussion questions. Students can use this journal page to take notes or record answers to some of the questions. In the Explain portion of the lesson, students will think, pair, share about the Explore activity and interconnectedness of organisms in an ecosystem. Then return to the book, What Does an Animal Eat? And read aloud the last few pages. Refer to the Read Aloud guide in the teacher pages for more details. Revisit the bee food chain and ask students how bees are affected by ecosystem changes. Then show this video on the importance of bees. Afterward, students will use this journal page to explain the importance of bees in a food chain, explain the effect humans have on the bee population, and what may happen in an ecosystem if the bees are removed. In the Elaborate portion of the lesson, share organism interactions within an ecosystem that are not predator and prey. First, read aloud At Home with Gopher Tortoise. A read aloud guide for this text is in the teacher pages. Then introduce the idea of the prairie dog as a keystone species by showing them this video. After the video, ask them why the prairie dog is an example of a keystone species, allowing them to turn and talk to discuss. In the Evaluate portion of the lesson, give students this journal page on ecosystem connections, asking them to make predictions about what may happen to the other organisms in this pond ecosystem food chain if the cattail plant disappeared. Finally, return to the unit Phenomena of the Disappearing Bees in Bill's story, asking students what we have figured out in this lesson that might help develop a solution to this problem. It may be helpful to continue recording their ideas on chart paper as evidence of how their thinking on this phenomena is changing over time. By the end of this lesson, students will describe examples of how living things are connected in an ecosystem and predict what would happen to organisms in an ecosystem when there is a change in that ecosystem.